Hello, everyone, and welcome to Arcane Station, your podcast for the strange, the weird, the unexplained, and a conversation about those things in a logical and measured manner. So, today I want to talk a little bit about the Legend of Boggy Creek. Now, I've seen this movie when I was 6 years old. We were at a drive-in movie theater, and I was in the back of my dad's truck at the time with my siblings. And I was terrified, but also fascinated. And I wanted to know more about what that thing was, the story behind it, and, everything I could possibly find to make sure that I understood what was going on. Now, I realized that that was a docudrama and not really happening on screen, but as a child, that felt very real to me. So it wasn't until much later that I started really getting into Bigfoot and those sorts of things, and that's why, I wanted to. Hopefully, you can't hear this jet flying overhead. That's why I wanted to, get into this podcasting and start talking about these things that I saw as a kid, the research that I've done afterwards, all the people that I've talked to and conversations that I've had in terms of their experiences, and try to put some some logic behind some of it, and some of it isn't logical and some of it isn't explainable, and that's okay, because I think there's portions of the world that we'll never be able to explain, but at least we'll have a conversation about it and try to make some sense of it. So now the reason why, again, why I wanted to start with Boggy Creek is because that was the actual thing that got me interested in all of this. And it wasn't until after I saw that I started looking into the Patterson-Gimlin film, and then I got into Loch Ness, and just a whole host of cryptids, paranormal research stuff, and just fascinated by it all. So what I'd like to do is sort of talk about the real stuff that I know, the things that other people have researched, and then go into high strangeness, because I think that's a part of this conversation to be had, and then move on to sort of different theories and how plausible or implausible they may be, and that's obviously going to depend on your faith and your your ability to believe. So I think those are the sorts of things that we're going to talk about. So very first thing is, let's talk about key authors and resources if you're interested in looking into the Legend of Boggy Creek or the Fouke Monster. So Lyle Blackburn has 2 books out, and he's considered the definitive Fouke Monster researcher. So the very first book is The Beast of Boggy Creek, 2012, and it's a comprehensive historical account. But then his latest book on Boggy Creek, the Boggy Creek Case Book, it's the Fouke Monster Encounters from 1908 to present, and that was published in 2022, and it has over 90 documented eyewitness reports. Now, there are other reports prior to this, and I think maybe Lyle maybe removed them, because there are reports from the 1850s of a wild, hairy man that attacked somebody and ripped their eyes out, and then rode off into the night on the person's horse. So that doesn't sound like a typical Bigfoot encounter, and I think during the 1850s there was a lot of sensationalized journalism to try to sell papers. So let's just discount those. Now, the other person to look at is Charles B. Pierce, and he directed The Legend of Boggy Creek, and he blended local eyewitness reports and reenactments, and they were actually in the movie. The people that had seen the beast and talked about those things in the movie were actual inhabitants of the area, and they saw what they're talking about. So I think that's really interesting. So that film popularized the legend nationally. It was just a regional legend, but it became a national thing as soon as that film came out. And a lot of 60s, 70s had a lot of exploitation films coming out at the same time. So it was a very big genre. I can remember The Faces of Death, and there were some other ones that were coming out that were highly sensationalized, and therefore created a huge stir, and people got interested in it. So one of the things that people were saying is that perhaps Charles helped popularize this, but also added to the story a little bit to try to make it even more sensationalized. And so I think what Lyle does is a really good job of is going back through all of the different eyewitness reports, talks about all the different things that have taken place, and then tries to add a layer of this could be this or this might be something else, right? Another person to look into, there is a website called The Skeptoid. It's actually a podcast, and he does a very similar job of like going through every sort of report that he hears and tries to add fact-based information and look into alternative, information and resources to try to become more even-handed in how he's approaching talking about these things. I'm going to try to do the same, but I'm also an avid believer in things like Bigfoot and interdimensional, extraterrestrial. So I think there are things out in this world that we cannot explain. Again, I'm going to try to not taint my talking about these things, with my own beliefs, but just try to talk about them in general. So there's a couple of other books that you could look at it too. One is from Lauren Coleman, and he is a person that has a cryptozoological museum up in Maine, I believe. And then there's also Ken Gerhard, who has a compilation of cryptid books, and he speaks about the Fouke Monster as well. So, switching from here's the things that you can look at yourself to sort of like a historical timeline, I think it's important to kind of go through a couple of those different key events and see what people are saying, right? So, like I said before, in the 1850s, the newspaper talked about a wild man in Arkansas swamps. So this is pre-modern era Fouke Monster sightings. But the first real sighting came in 1946 from a Sheriff Greer, who received the information from a homeowner, and he actually saw the creature that was at this woman's house. And when she called to get the police response, Sheriff Greer was the person that showed up, and he actually saw the creature. In 1955, there was a man named Willie Smith, and he fired 15 shots at the creature that was throwing debris at his dog. So nobody was found. The thing ran off, and he didn't see anything else after that. In 1969, Miss Harvin sees the creature at her pig pen as if it was trying to grab a pig, and then later on her porch, and she said it had glowing eyes and a foul odor. And the glowing eyes is really interesting because, there's no conversation about if it's eye shine versus internal glowing. But when everyone talks about glowing eyes, I'm assuming eye shine. However, some people have said that there's actually glowing internally from the eyes, which makes no sense for a nocturnal creature to have that feature where the eyes glow internally. It seems like it would almost be impossible to see anything. But anyway, that was the conversation that she had. And then in 1971, the Ford family incident, which is what the Boggy Creek movie is all about. And so basically the creature reaches through a window and tries to grab someone, and then the family shoots back at it. And then Bobby Ford is hospitalized as part of that exchange, whether it was, I think it was because he was grabbed and pulled. He was hospitalized because of that. And so, but they did shoot at the creature, and it did run off. And then, so that was May 2nd. And then May 23rd of 1971, the Woods family sees the creature crossing the Highway 71, and the game warden examines additional three-toed prints. Now, the three-toed prints are interesting. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail later on, but there's no mammal in the United States that have a three-toed print. So I'm a little confused about that. All right, so 1978 to 1998, there's sightings in Russellville, Crossett, Sulphur River, and over 40 reports in 1997 alone. So there's, quite a few reports throughout history. And then recently, in the 2000s, all the way up to 2024, there's been sporadic reports that continue. And then the recent track casts that happen are also three-toed but different. And again, I'll talk about the morphology here in a little bit of those prints. And then they hear and record howling, which they say sounds like as if it's multiple vocal cords at the same time. So I'll just say that it is possible for a human to make multiple sounds at the same time. If you've ever watched a beatboxer or listened to like Mongolian throat singing, you've heard somebody make multiple tones at the same time. So it is humanly possible to do those things. Now, another element of that is typically that sound is so loud that it's like almost eardrum shattering. So, like that's a little bit less likely that it's a human that's making that sound, but it is possible. There has been people that can create really loud sounds. All right, so we have a little bit of the timeline of sightings and that sort of thing. I want to talk about the physical evidence and just a summary of that. So like I said before, people talked about these three-toed footprints, and they were up to 17 inches long and 7 inches wide. However, the very first ones that people were reporting said that the toes were really, really thin and like parallel to each other, not splayed, which is an odd morphology for anything. So if you look at a bird walking, it'll curl its hand or its talons up, and then when it sets the foot back down, it actually splays its forward toes, and those are typically three toes. Now, they also have a fourth toe that points the opposite direction, which is how it gets its balance, right? It stands on this this pod, this this structure that allows them to be stable. Without that backwards toe, they would not be stable. So the three-toed parallel, almost perpendicular, the parallel to each other, so close together, makes no sense. It just doesn't sound like that's a real thing. Like maybe it's a misidentification of a track. But the more recent ones actually are splayed. They're much thicker and show a greater resemblance to actual anatomy than the previous ones. So that's either the person that was hoaxing has gotten way better at making those tracks, or didn't understand how to make the tracks in the first place and just was sloppy about it. But there are three-toed animals, and again, I'll talk about this in a little bit. But there are three-toed animals. They're just not specifically mammals. They are not in North America. They're in Asia and Africa. And they're highly unlikely to be the creature that people were seeing. The other thing that people describe is that the creature is 7 to 10 feet tall and is super hairy and a hulking figure with glowing red silver dollar eyes, like the size of silver dollars. And again, that internal glowing appearance, I don't understand. They also report a foul odor, and multiple witnesses have talked about this, and they said it was damp, like skunk or rotting wet dog decay, as if a wet dog was rolling in roadkill. So it's that level of stench. And then there's also evidence, which are scratch marks that were on the sidings of houses, broken trees, partial trails, which disappear. So let's say you have a trackway and you see these tow tracks that are happening, and then at some point it'll stop, and as if the creature has disappeared. And again, I don't know what to make of that, because that's not typical behavior, and we'll go into that a little bit later, but that just seems like a really odd thing to me. So as a means of trying to understand or to try to make sense of all this, I started looking into a few things. So one was, is there any government secret labs there? Like, there's been animal testing, there's been human testing in the past. It actually happens. So I went and looked, and it's like there's no abandoned black ops animal testing facilities anywhere near Miller County. Now, it could be in the swamp somewhere, we wouldn't know, but really the closest military training facility is Fort Chaffee, and it's around 75 miles away. And hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's either Chaffee or Chaffee. And there's no reports of biological weapons or experimentation or any of that stuff. And there's also another facility called Pine Bluff Arsenal, and that's around 200 miles away, and that's a chemical facility. So there's not a cryptid lab or an animal lab or any of that sort of organism testing, right? And then there's no historical reports of government cover-ups or creature containments or any of that stuff. I even looked into, could it be an animal escaped from the zoo or a wildlife sanctuary or that sort of thing. There's quite a few times, especially in Texas, where people have exotic animals and then they release them when they get too hard to handle. And so you may have a loose lion or tiger somewhere out in the middle of nowhere because people couldn't take care of them anymore. So there is that possibility that somebody had some sort of creature, gorilla, orangutan, something like that, and then released them into the wild, but it's highly unlikely. Now, there are reports in Florida and that sort of thing of escaped animals, monkeys and that sort of thing, that are actually living in the swamp. So it's possible that that's the case, but it's highly unlikely. So the other thing I thought was maybe it's a bird, but again, the morphology of the foot doesn't make sense. It doesn't have that fourth toe sticking in the back, which would provide that balance and support that it would need. It's much larger than any bird, and people typically do not mistake birds, even large ones like shoebill or hornbill cranes. They don't look at them and think that's a human, right? So they look at this creature and think that's a humanoid, but they don't look at a hornbill, or I think it's a shoebill or a hornbill, one of the two. The big giant African cranes, they don't look at that and go, that's a person. So that kind of went out the window as well. So, there's a Sherlock Holmes saying, it's when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth, right? So we have to look at all these different things that have taken place, and people are seeing something, people are interacting with things and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go into a little bit of high strangeness now, because I think that's an element of this that's really interesting, and I think that's where logic departs, and it's more about belief systems and about faith, right? So again, I talked about the tracks vanishing mid-trail with no exit path. I think that's considered high strangeness, and it just makes no sense to me. Now, the vocalizations, I said before, they're layered or multiphonic, and again, that's uncharacteristic of known animals, but it's possible with humans, so it could be possible with any sort of creature. So even though that's considered a high strangeness, I think that's just strange. I wouldn't call that high strangeness. Now, the other thing that is high strangeness, though, is that witnesses report this intense dread and nausea and freezing in fear prior to ever seeing the creature. They, in their bones, know something is wrong. They've decided to pause. They're feeling dread, and then they see the creature. So I know we do have sort of a sixth sense. If you trained as a sniper or trained as a military, like special forces, you're trained not to stare at people. You're trained to look at sort of in the area, but not directly at them, because people can actually feel other people's eyes on them. And so that gives them a sense of unease, and it makes them react in a way that would probably be counter to the thing that you want to have happen, right? So they're trained to sort of look at the people in their periphery instead of full on staring at them. So maybe that's a byproduct of this creature intently staring at someone and them feeling it. So I'm going to chalk it up to that. There's other reports of seeing giant shadows, and they only see the form of the creature. It's black, or semi-transparent dark cloud, and in that cloud they'll see like eyes and glowing eyes or eye glints, like as if it was the eye shine from a flashlight. So they do see those sorts of things. And the other thing that they see quite a bit is these tree symbols. So these structures, the crossed limbs, the trees that are pulled up by the roots and then placed in a very odd way, and like massive trees, right? Something that people wouldn't spend the time and effort doing. The other thing, that if you were to pull up a tree by its roots, and it was substantially large enough that you couldn't do it by hand and you had to use some sort of machinery, typically you would wrap a chain around a tree or something to that effect, and there are no blemishes on the bark. It's just as if it was magically ripped up and turned upside down and placed into this X structure, and then sometimes they're interwoven with other trees. So I consider that a high strangeness sort of thing. And so when I'm thinking about this high strangeness stuff, I try to like wrap my head around it and compartmentalize it into something that maybe science knows about. So for instance, quantum theory or interdimensional elements. So science recognizes quantum theories and quantum effects, and they also recognize multiple dimensions. Obviously, there's 3 dimensions in our life, and then there's a 4th dimension, which is time. So we're actually living in a dimensional plane, but perhaps there's something there that's, and I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think they said there as many as 11 or 13 different planes of existence beyond the 4D. So is it possible that these creatures vibrationally, because it's a dimensional thing and everything is a vibration, an effect, is it possible that these things are able to phase in and out of our dimensional existence due to vibration? So that is possible in interdimensional theory. The other thing that's possible in quantum theory is a term called quantum tunneling, where basically you can tunnel out of a space, but that only works on a subatomic level. So for instance, you can create like a tiny wormhole that an electron passes through, but not like a giant human, right? So that doesn't work. But this interdimensional thing makes more sense because it is possible, I think, for things to phase in and out of dimensions. And there's a few theorists that think this way as well, like Hynek, Keel, and Vail. They all talk about these parallel vibrational realms that might intermittently manifest in ours. So that's a possibility. So this theory would have explained the vanishing tracks, the ghost-like behavior, and the inability to capture it, even to capture it on camera. Typically, like, it's pretty blurry, and I'm wondering vibrationally if they're unable to take pictures of these things because they're moving at such a different vibration than our normal physical selves. And I know that sounds odd, but I'm just trying to like wrap some science stuff around the weirdness. And then if you go into a faith-based sort of thing, you can think about this in terms of biblical elements. So there are stories in the Bible about giants and hairy beings and that sort of thing. And so if you go in the biblical route and start looking at Nephilim, and there's this book in Genesis 6:4, which described the Nephilim as giants who are the offspring of divine beings and humans. There was an event on Mount Hermon where the fallen angels, the 200 watchers, came down and they made a pact with the humans to basically give them our technology their technology in exchange for the hands of their daughters in marriage. And I'm sure, these people were like, look at this, I get this technology, my wife's marrying this giant, beautiful person. It's the best of both worlds. And what happens is that these creatures that come out of these pairings are called abominations, and that's where giants come from. Timothy Alberino has a really good book around the Mount Hermon event, so I would take a look at it. But the story is that these watchers came down and they corrupted creation. And so one of those are, like if you look at Cain. So Cain was cursed to wander the earth, marked from birth, and he's a spiritual wanderer. But also he was described as a hairy creature. And then if you go again into the Bible and look at the Moses flood narrative, the earth was cleansed by a flood to purge the Nephilim. However, in the Bible it also says there were giants in the time of Noah and afterwards. So apparently not all creatures were taken care of. Now, some of those could have died, and some people believe that these abominations that died, the Nephilim, those are what we consider demons today, these spiritual, disembodied abominations of a mating between a supernatural being and a human. And so I'm wondering if there's two or three things that are happening here. One is that people could be seeing a remnant of these abominations. Two, that there's some sort of, not demonic, but this corruption of an actual type of animal that's causing these sort of aberrations that look like humanoid people. And I'm also wondering if these are the same things that we hear about in ancient Greek and Roman mythology, like the Minotaurs and Medusa and Cyclops and that sort of thing. Like there's these abominations from a human and there's these abominations from these spiritual beings and some sort of creature or person or animal, right? So it talks about them in the Bible in that way. And I'm wondering if those ancient mythological creatures were also real, just like Zeus and Hermes and Aphrodite and all that could also be these 200, the fallen angels that took the human women as wives and created these abominations. So again, there's a lot of books around this. This isn't just my theory. There's a lot of people that are talking about this, and I think it's really interesting. Now, in terms of the interpretation of the Fouke Monster being a spiritual hybrid, I think it's a possibility. I think it could be this creature. Maybe it's a relic from the past that's also been infused with this sort of supernatural, Nephilim, angelic sort of inhabitants, like a spiritual inhabitants in this creature's body, and it's cursed to roam. Now, obviously, that would be like one creature, but I think there's a series of creatures and different types of creatures, and it's becoming actually more and more prevalent that people are seeing these things. Now, there's another, again, high strangeness, but maybe it's a more psychological approach to looking at this. And in the 70s, there was also a study done at a university where basically these people decided that they were going to create a ghost. And at this university, they created every aspect of what this ghost was supposed to be, where it came from, what happened to it, the name and everything. And as a result of everyone in the study putting their emotional attention and their thoughts into the creation of this creature, this ghost, it actually came to be. And it would have conversations and communications with these people. Now, is this some sort of spirit that decided to play a trick? Or was this what we consider a tulpa or a thought creature? Basically, it's a kind of like the mind over matter thing. If you put your mind to it, you can create, you can manifest things. And I'm wondering if that's actually what's happening with Bigfoot. Like everyone has this intention of this is a real thing, therefore it is real. We're like basically writing our own reality. I think that's an interesting idea. I think it handles a lot of like psychological, spiritual, physical sort of abnormalities of this creature, and it allows us to look at it in a really interesting way. That it's in fact, I don't want to say it's I don't want to say that it's mass hysteria, but I'm wondering if it's like a mass intention that's now become real because of that mass intention. I think that's a possibility. So here's the way I'm looking at it, and I'm inviting you to do the same thing. I think evidence certainly confirms there's a physical presence of something. I think there's footprints, there's odor, and there's certainly witness accounts. And I think I've talked to enough people at these Bigfoot conferences and cryptid conferences that you can see it in their eyes, you can hear it in their voices, and they believe it with every fiber in their being that they saw what they saw, and you're not going to change their mind. And I believe them because it's hard to be that emotional and that disturbed by something that you're making up. So biological explanation fails. I said before that there's no three-toed creatures, mammal or otherwise, except for two. One is the African rhino. The African hippopotamus, I believe. And for sure, there's no way that it's going to stand on its hind legs, cover itself in Spanish moss, and be pretending to be some sort of ape-man creature with long limbs, arms and legs, with large hands and a big brow, and it looking humanoid. That's not a possibility. The other one is in Asia, and that's the tapir. And again, those they look like pigs, basically. So it's not that either. So there's no biological explanation for this. There's no credibility to the escaped animal or the conspiracy of an abandoned, like biological weapon manufacturing facility. It's not showing up. Now, the high strangeness suggests a conscious, intentional presence. So it's like not random wildlife. It's doing things in regard to people. It's intentionally interacting with people in a way that causes them to see it. There's no reason, and this happens all the time, and it just fascinates me that if a creature wanted to be not seen, it surely would not run across the road in broad daylight in front of a motor vehicle, right? So, but this has happened. So I don't understand this. It has to be intentional interaction with humans just to show you that it's here. I think the interdimensional theory offers a coherent model for manifestation, disappearance, and limitations, but I don't think it answers all the questions. And then in the biblical paradigm, there is the mythic frame of Nephilim as a spiritual, physical hybrid and timeless watchers. So again, angels are not just spiritual beings, they're physical as well. And so those are the things that you could look at and say it's of two worlds, therefore it's able to move through two worlds. So, like I said before, I'm not an expert for any of this. I'm just trying to come up with a conversation around what this might be, where it has come from, where it's going, and how we can have a conversation and look into this in a deeper way. And then I'm really hopeful that as we progress through this and I get some feedback from you guys about what you think it is, we can have those really interesting conversations. So the Fouke Monster doesn't fit within our natural science, and it aligns far better with a model of interdimensional entity. So I'm going to go with interdimensional entity with spiritual and biblical origins. All right, so this has been Arcane Station. I'm your host, Mike Porter, and I look forward to hearing from you in regards to this podcast. And if you have anything that you want to talk about, send me an email or post it in chat on Discord or on Instagram. Love to hear from you. Talk to you later.